I moved into this apartment a few months ago. It was nothing special. Just an older building, slightly creaky floors, drafty windows, the usual. But it was cheap, and it felt like a fresh start. I didn't pay much attention to the occasional weird creak or groan the place made. Old buildings do that, right? But then things started happening. At first it was little stuff I didn't even register right away. A pen that I swore was on the desk now lying on the floor. A picture frame that looked slightly off from where I had placed it. I chalked it up to memory lapses or maybe the building settling. No big deal. Then one night, I came home from work, exhausted. Threw my keys on the kitchen counter, grabbed a beer and collapsed on the couch. When I got up later to grab another drink, I noticed the keys weren't where I left them. They were on the opposite side of the counter. I stood there for a minute, trying to piece it together. I hadn't touched them and I was alone. Was I that tired? I ignored it. The real freaky stuff started a few weeks later. I woke up one morning to find my couch pushed halfway across the living room. I hadn't heard a thing. I should have heard it, right? That couch is heavy. I stood there staring at it like an idiot, trying to remember if I moved it before bed. I hadn't. There's no way I could have. Then it got worse. My kitchen appliances, stuff like the microwave, the blender, started turning on by themselves in the middle of the night. I'd wake up to the sounds of the blender going full blast at 2 a.m. I'd go in, unplug it, and stand there in my boxers, sweating and freaked out, wondering what the hell was going on. Once the stove turned itself on while I was in the shower. I came out to find the burners red hot, but I hadn't touched them. The doors started slamming too. Not just closing. Slamming, hard enough to shake the walls. Every night around 3 a.m., one of the bedroom doors would slam shut like someone was pissed. I couldn't even sleep properly anymore. I'd just lie there, staring at the ceiling, waiting for something else to happen. So I decided to set up cameras. I needed to see what was going on, if it was some weird electrical thing or maybe I was just losing my mind. I got some cheap security cameras off Amazon and set them up in the living room, kitchen, and hallway. I thought maybe I'd catch a rat knocking things over, or the building was just settling weirdly. When I checked the footage the next morning, I was not prepared for what I saw. The footage showed me sleepwalking. But not in the typical way. I wasn't just wandering aimlessly. I was moving things, rearranging the furniture, turning on the stove, even standing in front of the mirror for what felt like hours just staring. But here's the thing. I've never walked in my life, ever. And I didn't remember a single thing. It was like someone else was inside me making me do it. I started to spiral. I stopped sleeping. I couldn't stand the thought of what I might do if I let myself drift off. Every time I closed my eyes, I imagined myself moving around the apartment, doing things I wouldn't even know about until I checked the footage. The cameras kept recording me night after night, rearranging the apartment like some twisted game. Then, last week, I woke up outside. I was standing in the middle of the street, barefoot, staring up at my apartment building. I didn't know how I got there. No memory of it at all. That's when I knew whatever was happening wasn't just some sleep disorder. Something was controlling me. Something inside that apartment. I haven't gone back since. I'm crashing on a friend's couch now, but I can't shake this feeling that whatever it was, whatever had its grip on me, isn't done. Sometimes, I wake up in the middle of the night, half expecting to find myself back there, moving things around, completely unaware. I don't know how long I can keep running, but I can't go back. When I first moved into the little house at the edge of town, I thought it would be peaceful. A break from the constant noise of the city, A fresh start. The house was perfect. Small, cozy, and tucked away from everything. It was exactly what I needed after a year of nonstop stress. The first couple of nights were quiet. Too quiet, actually. I wasn't used to the kind of silence you get out in the country. No cars, no distant hum of city life. Just nothing. It took some getting used to, but after a few days I finally started to settle in. I even convinced myself that moving here was the best decision I'd ever made. But then, one night I heard them. I was lying in bed, drifting off to sleep when I heard what sounded like faint whispers. At first I thought it was the wind. The house was old after all, and probably made a lot of strange noises at night. But as I lay there, listening, I realized these weren't just creaks and groans of an old building. They were voices. I couldn't make out what they were saying, but there was a definite rhythm to it, like a conversation happening just out of earshot. I got up, wandered around the house, checked the windows, nothing. The streets outside were empty. No one was around. I even checked my phone to see if maybe I'd left a podcast playing or something, but there was nothing. Eventually, I shrugged it off. I mean, who hasn't heard random noises when they're half asleep, right? I figured I was just tired and imagining things. So, I went back to bed, convinced that was the end of it. But the next night, it happened again. This time the voices were louder, clearer, and it wasn't just whispers. It was like two people having a full-on conversation right outside my bedroom door. I shot up in bed, heart racing, and strained to listen. I couldn't make out every word, but I caught bits and pieces, enough to know they were talking about me. I remember distinctly hearing the word her followed by something about waiting. I thought maybe someone was messing with me. But when I jumped out of bed and opened the door, the hallway was empty. The house was silent again. My pulse was thudding in my ears, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. For the next few days, the voices came and went. Some nights they were soft, almost like they were whispering just to make sure I knew they were there. Other nights they were louder, more insistent, and always they were talking about me. But the worst part? They knew things. Personal things. I heard them mention stuff about my past, things no one here should have known. They talked about my family, about a relationship I'd been in years ago. They knew details I'd never shared with anyone. I was getting paranoid, jumping at every little sound, checking the locks constantly. So, I did what anyone in my situation would do. I set up a recording device. I needed proof that this wasn't all in my head. I mean, it couldn't be, right? That night, I set my phone to record and left it on my nightstand. The voices came again, right on schedule. I was too freaked out to even move. I just lay there under the covers, heart pounding, trying to listen without letting them know I was awake. In the morning, I played back the recording. At first, it was just static. I fast-forwarded a bit and then I heard them, the same voices, just like every night before. But what stopped me cold was that one of the voices, one of the main voices I'd been hearing all this time, was mine. There, clear as day, I was talking, conversing with someone else. Someone I couldn't see, couldn't remember. It was my voice, but I had no memory of ever saying any of it. I listened to myself laughing, sharing details of my life, even responding to things the other person was saying. But here's the thing. I never heard the other person on the recording. Just me. Just me, talking to thin air. I don't know what freaked me out more. The fact that the voices were real, or the fact that I was part of the conversation. I couldn't stop shaking after that. I tried telling myself it was some weird sleep-talking thing, maybe some kind of stress-induced episode. But deep down, I knew it wasn't that simple. The next night, I didn't sleep at all. I just sat in bed listening, waiting. When the voices came, I covered my ears, refusing to listen. But they were still there, talking, laughing, whispering. And somewhere in the middle of it all, I heard my voice again. I don't know what's happening. I don't know if I'm losing my mind or if something is playing games with me. But I can't stay here anymore. I don't want to know what they'll say next. I don't want to hear my voice again saying things I don't remember. I just want the voices to stop. Shadowy figures. I'd stayed late at school more times than I could count. Being a teacher meant there were always papers to grade, lessons to plan, and emails to catch up on. Most of the time, the empty halls were comforting, a peaceful quiet compared to the chaos of the day. But then, I started noticing them. It began subtly enough. A dark shape darting in the corner of my eye, the kind of thing you could easily write off as nothing. At first, I didn't think much of it. I figured I was just tired, working too many late nights, or maybe it was a janitor making the rounds. But the more it happened, the harder it became to brush off. The figures started appearing more frequently. I'd be sitting at my desk grading papers when I'd catch movement just outside my classroom door. I'd glance up expecting to see someone passing by, but there'd be no one. Or at least, no one I could see clearly. Just a shadow, lingering for a second too long. One evening, as I packed up to leave, I turned off the lights in my room and stepped into the hallway. That's when I saw it, clear as day, a shadowy figure standing at the far end of the hall. At first, I thought it was a trick of the dim light, but this shape was different. It wasn't just a blur or a flash. It was tall, human-like, and watching me. I froze. My heart raced, but I tried to reason with myself. It had to be the janitor, right? But as I started walking toward the exit, the figure moved, gliding, almost floating, farther down the hallway. It didn't walk like a person would. It seemed to stretch as it moved, like it wasn't tied to the same rules of gravity as I was. I stopped, and it stopped too. My breath caught in my throat. Deciding to ignore it, I rushed out of the building. Maybe I was just seeing things, I thought. Stress can play tricks on your mind, right? But as I drove home, the unease stayed with me, creeping in the back of my mind. The next night, I stayed late again, determined to finish some overdue grading. I convinced myself the shadow had been my imagination. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong with this school after hours. That night was worse. Every time I looked up, there was another shadow. They were everywhere, moving through the hallways, lurking near doors. And they weren't just passing by like before. They seemed to be watching me, following me. At one point, I got up from my desk to head to the copy room. As I walked down the hallway, I felt something behind me. I turned quickly and saw them, multiple figures standing still, just out of reach of the light from my classroom. My stomach dropped. I took a step back, and they took a step forward, moving in unison. I didn't even think. I bolted back into my classroom and slammed the door shut, my heart pounding in my chest. I stood there, listening, waiting for footsteps, breathing, anything. But the only sound was the buzzing of the fluorescent lights above me. After what felt like an eternity, I dared to look out into the hallway again. They were gone. I packed up my things quickly, determined to leave. As I hurried toward the exit, the shadows returned, surrounding me from all sides. No matter which direction I turned, they were there, blocking my way. It was as if they were hurting me, pushing me toward something deeper within the school. Terrified, I sprinted toward the stairwell, but before I could reach it, the shadows closed in. That's when I realized they weren't just figures. They were people, or at least they had been. Their shapes were clearer now, faces contorted in agony, mouths open in silent screams. My stomach churned as I realized what they were trying to show me. There was something hidden in this school, something awful. The next day I did some research. It turns out years ago, a fire broke out in the building. The school had been rebuilt, but the original foundation remained. Several students and teachers were trapped during the fire, and they never made it out. I hadn't ignored the shadows like others had, but I couldn't help but wonder, was that what they wanted? To warn me? Or were they just biding their time, waiting for me to become one of them? To this day, I can't stay late anymore. Not after what I've seen. But sometimes, even as I rush out before the sun sets, I still catch a glimpse of them in the hallways, waiting. When my wife Laura and I first moved into our new suburban home, we were thrilled. It had that fresh, untouched feeling, and we spent our days decorating, arranging furniture, and making it ours. But almost immediately, something didn't sit right. Little things, like the chill in the hallway despite all the windows being sealed shut, or the creaking sounds late at night when the house should have been settling, were easy enough to dismiss. We shrugged it off as normal, old house stuff. It wasn't until about a week later that things took a turn. Laura woke up one morning with a small bruise on her arm. Nothing unusual, just a round purple mark, as if she'd bumped into something. We laughed about how clumsy we both were, considering I had a similar mark on my leg, which I couldn't quite explain. I figured I had just hit myself on a corner or something while moving boxes. But then it got worse. Every morning after that, Laura would wake up with fresh bruises on her thighs, her back, even her neck. They weren't small anymore either. They were bigger, more jagged, and looked like she had been grabbed or pulled violently. One night I woke up to her gasping. I turned on the light and there were deep, angry scratches across her forearm. They were fresh, like someone or something had just dug into her skin while she slept. But no one else was there. We didn't own a pet and the door to our room had been locked. That's when I noticed the marks on my own body. Bruises in the shape of fingerprints, thin cuts along my legs, and the worst part, the feeling of being watched. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe we were scratching ourselves in our sleep. Maybe the bed frame was causing the bruises somehow. We even replaced the mattress thinking it might help, but nothing changed. After 2 weeks, we decided to set up cameras in the bedroom, hoping to catch whatever was happening while we slept. When we watched the footage the next morning, our hearts sank. There was nothing. No movement, no shadows, no sign of anything touching us. But the scratches, bruises, and the feeling of being gripped were there, clear as day. And then came the symbols. Laura was the first to notice. The bruises weren't just random anymore. They were forming shapes, lines like some kind of language or code. I could see it too. Faint impressions on my arm started to show up in similar patterns, almost like claw marks, but more deliberate. The realization hit me like a punch in the gut. Whatever was causing this wasn't trying to hurt us, it was trying to send us a message. We scoured the internet, looking up ancient symbols, trying to figure out if these shapes meant anything. And then we found it. The marks on our skin, wavy lines and sharp pointed symbols. They matched an old, obscure set of warning signs used in ancient rituals. The warning was clear. Leave before it's too late. But we didn't leave. Not immediately. We couldn't just pack up and run, not without understanding what was happening. So we stayed. And the next few nights were, well, they were a blur of terror. The marks became more aggressive, the scratches deeper. One night, I woke up to Laura screaming. There were marks around her neck as if someone had tried to strangle her. We had to leave. By the time we made the decision to go, I had a deep gash across my shoulder, and Laura had bruises that looked like handprints wrapping around her arms. We packed in a frenzy, every second feeling like whatever was tormenting us was growing stronger, angrier. As we drove away from the house for the last time, I looked down at my hands. There were no new marks, no new scratches, but that feeling of being watched. It never left. I've since spoken to the new owners. They seem happy enough. No strange occurrences, no bruises, no scratches. But they mentioned something odd the other day. A small symbol they found carved into the wall behind the bed. I didn't have the heart to tell them what it meant. We've tried to move on, but every now and then, Laura and I wake up with new marks. Fainter, but still there. And sometimes late at night, I swear I can still feel those invisible fingers brushing against my skin, reminding me of the warning we almost didn't heed. I never used to be this forgetful. I chalked it up to stress at first, work deadlines piling up, pressure from my boss, and trying to balance it all with a social life. But the moments of lost time became more frequent and longer. At first, it was little things. I'd glance at the clock while making dinner, only to look back and see hours had passed. My phone would be filled with messages, and I'd have no memory of sending or receiving them. It wasn't until one Saturday morning that I realized something was seriously wrong. I woke up feeling like I'd just taken a quick nap, but the date on my phone said it was Monday. I hadn't been drunk or anything. I was just missing time. 2 whole days. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe I had come down with something and slept through the weekend. But when I walked into the kitchen, everything was different. The cereal box I always left open was neatly closed. Dishes I don't remember washing were drying on the rack. It wasn't just me losing time. Things were happening while I was gone. I tried to ignore it, but each blackout left more questions. I'd find new clothes hanging in my closet, clothes I'd never seen before. There were new photos and frames on the mantel, pictures of me with people I didn't know, smiling, looking happy. How? I don't even recognize these faces, but they were looking at me like we were best friends. I started getting nervous when random people in town began greeting me. Some would call out, "Hey, Scott," with a wave and a smile, but I had no idea who they were. My small town isn't the type of place where you meet strangers every day, and yet they knew me. Their faces were unfamiliar, but they seemed to know more about my life than I did. That's when I started keeping a journal. I wrote down everything, what I did, where I went, even the time I went to bed each night. I thought I could track when it was happening, maybe even catch it in the act. But after one particularly long blackout, I found my journal entries had been rewritten. The pages were still mine, but the handwriting was off, just slightly, as if someone was imitating me. The details inside were worse. Entire days were filled with memories I didn't have, places I hadn't been, conversations I hadn't had. There were notes in the margins about people I didn't know and things I didn't understand. It was like someone, or something, was living my life when I wasn't, taking over my body, my routine, and my relationships. I even found notes written to myself. One said, "We had fun last night, didn't we?" Another, "I'll be back soon." I tried calling friends, real friends, but they all thought I was losing it. No one had noticed anything out of the ordinary. Then came the longest blackout yet. I woke up to find myself sitting at a cafe with a woman I didn't know, holding her hand. She smiled at me, clearly happy, but I had no memory of meeting her. When I excused myself and stumbled into the bathroom, my reflection didn't look right. My eyes were tired, but it wasn't just that. Something was off. Something inside me, like I wasn't alone in my own head anymore. I don't know what's happening to me. The blackouts are getting longer. Whatever or whoever is controlling me is taking over more and more. I'm afraid that soon there won't be anything left of me at all. Just an empty shell living someone else's life.